Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Marianne Monteleone, and welcome to LIBOR's Wednesday webinar. And just as important as being here, we want to welcome you to our Global Awareness Month. March, each Wednesday, we featured a different initiative of global business, and this is our week 3. And we have a very special guest here with us today to talk about the basics of the EB-5 green card. So without further delay, we turn it over to Evan Smith, who is our global staff liaison. Evan?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Marianne, for the introduction. Wow, I can't believe it's already week 3 of our Global Success Month. I hope you've all been enjoying it so far. Today, I am pleased to introduce Julia Park, who is here to talk about the infamous EB-5 visa program. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat or use the Q&A feature, and they will be addressed later on in the Q&A session. The EB-5 immigrant visa program is a federal immigration program that provides a route for immigration to the United States through investment into job-creating entities. Most recently, Congress passed the EB-5 Reform and Integrity Bill on March 10th, 2022, which was the first real change to the program since 1993. Julia is the Managing Director of Advantage America New York Regional Center, which is a federally designated EB-5 regional center. Julia is also an immigration attorney focusing on EB-5 immigrant investor visas and a frequent speaker on the topic of EB-5. She began her legal career at Kravitz, Swaine & Moore LLP in New York City, where she practiced security laws and has served as counsel at Levitt & Needleman PC, an immigration firm also in New York City. Prior to practicing law, Julia was a simultaneous interpreter in Seoul, Korea. Please help me give a warm virtual welcome to Julia Park.
Thank you, Evan. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, so welcome. I heard that there were a lot of you here interested in the EB-5 investor visa. So let me start with the basics, because I think a lot of people have different levels of understanding about what even a green card is. So Evan, I'm going to share my screen. And we will go from here. Okay, so the EB-5 immigrant investor visa is a way that people can immigrate to the United States. There are 2 basic ways that people can immigrate to the US. One is through family-based immigration, and another is through employment-based immigration. Employment-based is called EB, that's where the EB comes from, and there are 5 EB categories, EB 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. EB1 is for extraordinary ability people, if you win the gold medal, the Nobel Peace Prize, or if you're an executive of a multinational company, those are EB1 routes. EB2 and EB3 are the most popular routes to immigrating to the United States. For example, I immigrated to the United States on an EB-2 visa, and that was through my husband, who's a computer programmer, and he got sponsored by an employer in the United States. So most people who do immigrate to the US through their work will come through an EB-2 or an EB-3 visa. And the difference is whether the job requires a master's degree or not, but I digress. And then there's EB-4, which is a special category visa. For example, if you were an interpreter for the US military during the Gulf War, you would qualify for EB-4. I'm sure there are more recent examples of special visas. And also, if you're clergy or somehow related to a religious if there's a religious entity connection, EB-4 is also a special category for that. So the remaining visa is EB-5, and EB-5 is the way that people can immigrate by investing into a job-creating business in the United States and creating jobs. So EB-5 has been around for a long time. And also, I forgot to mention, I plan to speak for about 40 minutes and leave 20 minutes at the end for Q&A. So EB-5 has been around since 1990. And when Congress first introduced the EB-5 investment visa, it was a fairly straightforward visa, meaning somebody would come to the United States. Well, let me start over. Somebody would invest $1 million into a business in the United States, get their green card, a conditional green card, come to the US, run the business, create 10 35 hours a week W-2 permanent jobs, full-time jobs, and then remove the condition 2 years later by showing that these jobs were created and get a permanent green card, So it was fairly straightforward, but $1 million in 1990 was a lot of money. And if you really think about it, structurally, for a foreigner, maybe they don't speak English, to come to the US to start a business and create 10 full-time W-2 jobs is not an easy prospect. So it wasn't very popular for a couple of years. And so in 1992, Congress started a new pilot program and add on to the EB-5 program, which now goes by the term direct EB-5. So the EB-5 I just explained to you is direct EB-5. They added a program called the Regional Center Program. This went into effect in 1993. And at the same time, the Regional Center Program went into effect, Congress introduced a new concept called TEAs, which is short for Targeted Employment Areas. So what they did was they said that if you invest in a business in a targeted employment area, a TEA, instead of 1 million, we'll let you just invest $500,000 for the same benefits. And at the same time, they introduced the concept of a regional center, which I will explain more, and said that instead of just running your own business, if you invest through a regional center, then we'll let you count indirect jobs, which is supposed to make this easier. And I'll explain why. So in 1993, the TA concept and the regional center was introduced together at the same time. That's why so many people are confused. And when they hear about EB-5, they think, well, if you invest if you invest through a regional center, it's $500,000. But if you want to run your own business, it's $1 million. That's not the case. Whether it's $500,000 or 1 million would depend on whether the project itself is located in a targeted employment area. Targeted employment area has a number of different definitions, but for our purposes, since we're in the tri-state area, it really means high unemployment. High unemployment means 150% or more of a certain area's current unemployment rate. So since 1993, a lot of people did EB-5 for a while. And then in 2006, there was huge litigation. 1996, there was huge litigation for almost 10 years. EB-5 was very slow. And then in 2006, it made a big comeback. It made a comeback in 2006 because 2006, 7, 8, because of a number of reasons, one of which is that the Canadian program, which is very popular for people overseas, especially from China, the amount became prohibitively expensive. And also they shut down some of their investor programs. Also, the US economy, once it hit the recession, the big recession, then a lot of construction projects needed money, and a couple of regional centers figured out, well, we can pool millions and millions of dollars to do this. So starting about 2006, it came back, and then it reached its peak in 2015, 2016, and all of the country numbers started to backlog. By that, I mean that it started to take longer and longer for people to get their green cards. So that was the program until now. It's always been around. It became infamous, like Evan said, because certain president's son-in-law's sister was talking about this in China. So there's always been a lot of background noise related to EB-5. I think fundamentally, a lot of people are discomforted by the fact that there is a route to immigrate through investment. It is not easy by any means, but that also kind of rubbed the people the wrong way. But this is not unique to the United States. Many, many countries have investment visas. Canada has had one for years. Many of the European countries have immigrant investor visas, Greece and Portugal being very popular for a while there. Anyway, so there was a lot of changes, and in 2019, throughout the years, and in 2019, basically what happened was the minimum investment, which stood at 500,000 for many, many years, was increased to 900,000. When it was increased to 900,000 in 2019, it wasn't done so through a law, which is what happened last week. It was done through a regulatory change, which didn't require Congress's vote. I will not go into the details, but there was litigation pushing back on the process of how that regulation was put into effect. And in 2021, the lawsuit came to the conclusion that everything went back to 500,000. Now, last week, through a legislative change, through an act of Congress, the entire EB-5 program has been revamped in many different ways. But today I'll only talk about a couple of ways that really affect investors. Now, so today it's 800,000, and it's a coincidence, because when Evan reached out to me last month and said, "Hey, Julia, can you do a webinar on EB-5?" I was like, do I really want to do this? Because for about past 2 years, the EB-5 visa has been very unpopular. The program itself came to a halt in July of 2021, last year, the Regional Center program. So let me talk a little bit about the Regional Center program and what that is. So a regional center is a program through which certain companies like ourselves can apply to the USCIS for a designation. It's almost like a license, but it's not really a license. We go through a process of asking the USCIS, the Department of Homeland Security, to designate us with the authority to create projects that will create jobs. And the indirect jobs that a project creates can be attributed to the individual investor. What that means basically is that we create funds, we create debt funds, and we get equity investment from overseas, and we use that debt fund to loan out the money to a qualifying project. Now, most of EB-5 up until this point, for at least the past 10 years, has been focused on real estate construction. And the reason for that is when you invest through a regional center, you're allowed to count indirect jobs, like I just explained. Direct jobs are pretty simple to understand. You open a restaurant, you hire workers, and they're on W-2, and if they work for 35 hours a week or more, they're considered full-time direct jobs. But indirect jobs are jobs created through an economic model where the money spent on the project, whether it's real estate or other type of project, is put through an economic model. And the input is the money spent, and the output is the number of indirect job impacts that is given on a region. So sounds complicated, but it's fairly simple. Let's say you build a hotel using $20 million. How many people will the hotel hire? Not that many, because most of the workers of a hotel are hired through a management company. They're not really part of the real estate company. So the real estate construction itself doesn't create a lot of permanent jobs. So a hotel built with $20 million might end up having only 5 employees related to the investment itself, because most of the jobs and the people who work in the restaurants as part of the hotel, they're not directly hired. And the construction jobs, if you think about it, they're the jobs of the construction companies, the GC, not the hotel itself. But by being able to capture the $20 million that was used for the construction, it spits out a job number, which if it's over 2 years, 20 times 12, which is around 250 job impacts. So if it's 250 jobs, that means it can accommodate 25 investors. Whereas if you do a direct EB-5 and put money into opening a hotel, you might not even have enough jobs for one investor if they don't hire more than 10 people. So the Regional Center program was able to capture more people into the program by allowing people to take credit for these indirect jobs. So that's the 10-job rule, comparing the Regional Center and the direct EB-5. A lot of people want to know if an investor does this, who can immigrate? You can, if you do the investment, you, your spouse, and any unmarried children under the age of 21 can get a green card as part of the program. I put here on this slide that a child can age out if the visa number is backlogged for particular countries. Let me briefly explain that, because that concept is important to understand why EB-5 was so popular and then kind of dropped off a cliff. In the immigration laws of the United States, each visa category, I talked about EB-1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I talked about the family category. Each visa category has a quota. There is a number of visas that the US government can issue each year for a particular category. And within that quota, there is also a per country quota. This was introduced in the early 90s with the idea that the United States wanted to diversify where people immigrated from. And as a result, the EB-5 visa has 10,000 categories available each year. And once you hit certain targets, which I will not go into, each country only has 7% of that quota, which means 700 visas. When EB-5 first started, it was very popular in China. It was very popular in many other countries, but mostly China. And China quickly hit the per country quota within a few years. What happens after that quota is hit is that it doesn't mean you can't invest and get in line, but the line becomes very, very long. Let me go to the next slide. The line becomes very, very long because only 700 visas are doled out to a certain country. So how long does it take? In order to immigrate to the United States, there's a two-step process, and this is not just unique to EB-5, this is for any category, including family categories. In order to get a green card to come to the United States, there are two steps that you have to go through. The first step is filing an immigrant petition. The I-526 is the immigrant petition for EB-5. If any of you here have done EB-2 or EB-3, you might have remember hearing about I-140. That's the immigrant petition for other employment categories. If you got your green card through marriage or through other family members, you might have heard of an I-130. The I-526 is the immigrant visa. And then after the immigrant visa, the immigrant petition, after the immigrant petition is approved, then step 2 is only then can you apply for a visa if you're overseas or apply for a green card if you're already in the United States. So I-526s are taking a very, very long time. It was already taking a very, very long time, but in recent years, there were 3 things that happened. The Trump administration had a policy where it was, and it's no secret, that it was trying to reduce immigration to the United States. So even all the petitions that were already in queue, there was a policy with the consulates to really slow down the process. So the number of immigrant visas that were actually issued reduced drastically. Then COVID happened and USCIS shut down for a few months, and then everything started to get really, really slow. It was already slow. COVID made it worse. And then the third thing that happened was the RC, the Regional Center Reauthorization Labs. In the very beginning, I mentioned that in 1993, Congress introduced the Regional Center program on top of the law. What that meant was instead of baking regional center programs into the law, so it was a permanent thing, Congress said, well, we're introducing this regional center program, but we're not going to just let it be part of the law. We're going to review this periodically to make sure that it's okay. And so the regional center program needed to be reauthorized in 3-year increments, 1-year increments. It varied. And it was never not reauthorized. And on June 30, 2021, it was supposed to be up for reauthorization again, and it didn't get reauthorized because of a lot of political reasons, which I will not go into. A lot of people were worried, especially people who are already in the system, thinking that, does that mean I won't get credit for the indirect jobs. Does that mean my green card process is, going down the drain? There's a lot of concern. We in the industry knew that there were always hiccups and it was going to be reauthorized. And we're telling people, don't worry, it's going to happen. Give it a few weeks, give it a month. Long story short, it lapsed on June 30, 2021, and it did not come back until last Friday. So there was a 9-month period where the USCIS did nothing related to EB-5. So because of the Trump administration policy of depressing visas, COVID, and regional center reauthorization lapsing, I-526 is, I don't know, maybe it's going to take 3 years, 4 years. It's going to take a very, very long time. So let's think of a potential investor that some of you who are on the call today might be encountering, because you're all here in the United States. You might have a client who's here on a student visa, who's here on an H-1B, who's looking to purchase a home, and the discussion somehow goes to green card, and they're thinking, oh, maybe I'll do EB-5. I got some stock options. I made some money. I think I can swing this. And they look into EB-5 and they go to an immigration attorney and they say, hey, I'm a student. I'm a senior. My student visa runs out and I'm thinking of doing EB-5. Now, if you come to me and ask me that question, I have to say, well, first we have to file the I-526, which is going to take 3 years, during which time you have no status. So if you're running out of your student status, if you're running out of your work status as an H-1B, which is the work visa, the temporary work visa, then you can do EB-5, but you will not be able to get any status to keep staying in the United States for 3 years. And then we have to do the next step, which is called the adjustment of status. So maybe 2, 3, 4 years. So if you can manage to keep yourself legal here for the next 3 or 4 years, you can invest $500,000 and we'll get you a conditional green card in 3 years. Oh, by the way, it's not 500, it's 900 now, we had to say in 2019. So as you can see, this is why the Regional Center program, which was very popular, suddenly became very unpopular. Not only did the amount almost double, you had to wait a very long time. What the new law did last year, and this is pretty big. This is going to really change the market. Again, we've been going through a lot of whiplash in the past few years, but now if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I want to do an EB-5 investment because I'm running out of my student status and I want to work here, or my kids want to keep going to school here, what can I do? I can say the new law now brings the amount up to 800,000. However, if you are already in the United States and are on a valid non-immigrant visa, such as a student visa or a work visa, we can do a concurrent filing of step 2. So step 1 and step 2 can be merged together. So you can invest today and file the I-526, but you can also file for the adjustment of status, which previously you could only do after the I-526 was approved. You can do that on the same day, and within approximately 6 months, you will be able to get a work permit and a travel permit. So you can wait out the 3 years for the I-526 to get approved, and then for your adjustment of status to get approved, which takes about another year. So you still won't be getting your conditional green card for another 4 years. However, you have status to stay and work and travel during that 4 years, and that's concurrent filing. So this is a really big deal in EB-5. Like I said, the law was just passed on Friday. Biden signed it into law yesterday. And so the landscape will be changing, because suddenly, even at 800,000, it becomes something more viable than what it was before. Now, if you're still overseas, you do not get the benefit of concurrent filing. If you're overseas, you don't suddenly get a special temporary work permit that allows you to move to the United States and wait it out here. You only get this benefit if you're already in the United States on a valid visa, such as a student or a work visa. So this is the really big change that happened last week. However, Remember, I talked about the 10,000 visas and the 7% quota and the backlog. That backlog still is relevant. So even if you are here on a student visa or a work visa, and even if you do an I-526 today, you cannot do concurrent filing if your country's EB-5 visa number is backlogged, which I briefly explained. So as of today, we know that China is backlogged for many, many years. So if you're a Chinese foreign student here looking to do EB-5 to adjust your status, unfortunately, you can't do that. Vietnam is, it backlogged, it came back, it backlogged, it came back. It's looking like it might or might not be backlogged once the visa numbers open up again, because Biden signed it today. There's a 60-day grace period, so we really won't know if the visa numbers are backlogged or not for another 2 months. But if you're from any other country, it pretty much means that you can do your investment and you can do a concurrent filing so you can stay in the United States while this process works out. The one thing that, two things, the new law created a separate line. Before, the world was divided into 2 separate categories, the regional center and the direct. And it could be sliced as regional center and direct, and then there was another slice, which was TA, non-TA. Now they've created another set called rural visas. And so 2,000 visas will be set aside for that. 200 visas will be set aside for infrastructure. 1,000 visas will be set aside for high unemployment, but that's not really relevant to us because there was already high unemployment people in the pipeline and they'll be taking up those visas. But once these 2 new lines, the 2,000 rural and the 200 infrastructure are set up, then there might be a possibility for people who are from China and Vietnam or other countries later when they're backlogged to do concurrent filing because suddenly a new window of opportunity has opened up. We don't know exactly how the mechanics of that will work because this is so new. The USCIS has the next 60 days to figure it out and let us know by issuing regulations. But I just wanted to throw out that is there. Now, let's see. So consular processing is if you are overseas, you're not here yet, then you do your I-526. And after the I-526 is approved, you have to go through an interview at a US consulate overseas to get your immigrant visa that will allow you to come in as a green card holder. And so that tacks on another year in addition to the I-526. Once you do get your conditional green card, many, many years from now, the initial conditional period is for 2 years. Then after 2 years, before the end of 2 years, you have to file another petition called an I-829 because the green card was conditioned on job creation. So at the I-829 stage, you have to go and show that the jobs were created. Obviously, if you invest through a regional center, this is all taken care of on the back end. So the regional center will be taking care of the job creation documents, so you can just file. And once you file the I-829, your conditional status is extended for another 2 years. And then after 2 years, if your I-829 has not yet been approved, which it never is, then you can keep extending your conditional period for 1-year increments until your I-829 is approved. And the I-829 was taking 3 or 4 years, even before all the backlog happened recently. So all in all, this is a very, 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 very long process. It's a very long process. And it really is, if I switch my hats from a regional center, putting together projects and soliciting investments, if I switch my hat to an immigration lawyer's perspective, I have to say the EB-5 visa is really a visa of last resort. It is for people who cannot get an EB-2, who cannot get an EB-3 because they didn't make the H-1B lottery, or because their job, you're an English major and you're an English teacher, nobody's gonna do an EB-2, EB-3 for you. There are plenty of Americans who speak English who are English teachers, for example. So if there are no other avenues for you to immigrate to the United States, the last resort is EB-5. Because it just takes so long, it takes a lot of money, I'll talk briefly about the investment. It takes and the return. It takes a lot of money. You're tying up a lot of money. There's no guarantee that you will get that money back because it is by definition an at-risk investment. And so it really is a visa of last resort. But in recent years, it's been very popular with people from India. There are a lot of people, highly educated people from India who are working in US companies in the tech industry and the finance industry, but Indian workers are the backbone of the US tech industry. It's a fact. And just like the EB-5 visa was very, very backlogged because a lot of people from China invested in EB-5, the EB-2 and EB-3 categories of India are very, very backlogged. Some of you may know this, some of you might have no idea, but the backlog is 50 to 150 years, depending on how you calculate it. So if you are from India and you are working in a US company, you are on a temporary H-1B visa until forever. And you go through the green card process, the EB-2 and EB-3, because only then can you keep extending your H-1B. So people still go through the motions of EB-2 and EB-3. But if you're an Indian student, if you're a student from India, or if you're already working here, you know that outside of marriage to a US citizen, EB-2 and EB-3s are not a viable option to actually get a green card because you're going to have to wait 50 to 150 years. Or you're going to have US citizen children and wait till they turn 21 for them to sponsor you as parents of green card holders. So you can see that EB-5 has been and will continue to be, even if the wait time keeps getting longer for EB-5, because it's not going to be 50 years for Indians. So EB-5 has been popular for people from India. If you're already in the United States as an Indian national on an H-1B and stuck in the EB-2, EB-3 backlog, obviously EB-5 is going to be attractive. It always has been attractive, but once the amount went up, people were not as interested. But now that we have concurrent filing, this might be a very viable option for Indian people, for people born in India. What you have to remember, however, is that once EB-5 picks up again and more people do this, Korea, India, Brazil, these numbers already, there are a lot of people who did I-526s. So concurrent filing will not be available to other countries as they backlog. So this year is kind of going to be a pivotal year because the visa numbers right now have only backlogged for China and probably Vietnam, but again, we're not sure. India, Korea, Brazil, which we all thought was going to backlog a couple of years ago, have still not backlogged, only because of the artificial depression of visa issuances due to the reasons I talked about. Let's see. Oh, okay. So let me talk a little bit about the investment. I didn't put it on the slide, but EB-5 is an at-risk investment by law. That's baked into the law. Canada was always a very popular destination for investor visas because Canada, well, unlike the US, Canada had a number of different immigrant investor programs because the states would be able to administrate them. In the United States, immigration law is a federal law. So states cannot set their own immigration policies, and ergo, as such, only EB-5 is the only immigrant investor program. But Canada used to have different ones for British Columbia. The federal government had one, but most of the Canadian programs were guaranteed by the government. So it was almost like a bond program. You put down $1 million or put down $2 million. After a certain number of years, you get the money back. The EB-5 program in the United States is by nature, by design, an at-risk program. So as a regional center, I can do my best to create and structure and underwrite a really safe project, but I cannot guarantee the return of investment. And as a result, people have lost their money. A lot of people have gone through the process fine, gotten their green cards, but a lot of people have lost their money too. And although a lot of people think that it's because of fraud, it's not really because the majority, it's not because of fraud. There is fraud here and there, but there's fraud everywhere. it's like saying, oh, you can't invest in blue chip companies because look at what happened to Enron. So, it's not that EB-5 itself has a lot of fraud. There is fraud, but those are the ones that get a lot of attention. But the reason a lot of people have lost their money in EB-5 is because it's an at-risk business. It's a real estate. It's risky. There are other industries, but by design, it is a risky project. So you can, work with an attorney, work with an investment advisor to mitigate those risks as much as possible. But fundamentally, that money is at risk, and that is by design. But if everything goes well, generally, the investment will be returned 5 to 7 to 9 years, and each project is a little bit different, but you cannot get your investment back before you can before you filed your I-829, which is the removal of condition application. And if there are any of you here who have clients who have I-526s pending because they already did EB-5, this concurrent filing will also apply to people already in the system. So if you know somebody, their attorney should be reaching out to them and letting them know about the law change. But if you have people in the pipeline who did the immigrant petition and that are just waiting around, these people, without waiting for the approval in 60 days from now, because there's a buffer, a grace period for the USCIS to re-man their EB-5 teams, they can also apply for adjustment of status. So this is a big thing. I can talk about this all day. I'm really just kind of trying to give an overview of what it is, why this new law change matters. And if you have any questions, I think now is a good time to kind of break, and I will answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. There actually were a decent amount of questions throughout the throughout your presentation, so I'll definitely love to ask them to you and see what the answers are. So the first question, you were talking about TEAs right in the beginning. Is New York considered a TEA?
Great question. So a lot of you might have seen big skyscrapers and like major projects going up in New York, all done by regional centers, all at 500,000. And the question is, I thought it had to be a targeted employment area. The targeted employment area is calculated on census numbers and unemployment numbers. And Manhattan, and the way it used to be calculated, this has now changed with the new law. The way it used to be calculated, the fact that Manhattan had Central Park in the middle of the island, which is a standalone census tract, diluted the numbers. Also, we have high unemployment in Bronx, certain areas of Brooklyn, which could be cobbled together to get the number that you wanted. So Manhattan has always been a TA until Friday. So you were seeing a lot of Manhattan projects at $500,000. Now, only certain areas of Manhattan will qualify. I know just because we had a project a couple years ago, we had a project on Morningside and 113th Street and right to the back door of Columbia Law School. And that was a TA. I know that area is still a TA, even with the new law change, but now you're not going to be seeing a lot of Manhattan TA projects just because of the rule change.
So I'm assuming that there's regional centers all over the country, and you have someone who's looking specifically in an area, or you have someone who's looking just to make the investment, and then they would go to those regional centers. I guess those would be the two different options that you would have.
So I think the question really, it's a good question. I get asked it all the time. To rephrase the question is, how do people find out about these investments, right? So if I have a client, they're trying to do EB-5, like, where do I go? Is there a website? That really is the question. It's a difficult question because EB-5 is an immigration program on the front end, but on the back end, it is a securities offering. It's no different from any private offering of preferred equity in a corporation. It's like It's not easily accessible to the public because the securities laws say the Securities Exchange Act of 1934 prohibited general solicitation of private securities that are not registered with the SEC. In other words, you don't open up a website and see, hey, I have a great company, come invest. You don't do that. You can only really trade registered securities on the stock exchange, or if you're doing private investment or private unregistered securities, you have to go through a broker dealer. I'm not talking about EB-5, I'm just talking about securities in general. You go through a broker dealer, you have to be what's called an accredited investor. So there are complicated securities law rules related to who can invest in private offerings. During the Obama administration, there was a slight relaxation of the securities law rules. So some of you might have heard about a 506c3 offering. So there was a big change in the securities law a few years ago where general solicitation of securities was made possible if the issuer jumped through a number of hoops. That's why some of you might have gone shopping in Woodbury and seen Chinese banners advertising EB-5 projects. That's because some regional centers took advantage of this new rule change in private offerings. But because EB-5 has been practically dead for the past 2 years, you might not have seen this. To answer your question directly, there is really no way or no one place you can look up. People, it's just such bad advice, but really, if you're in the United States, the only way you can find out about these projects is to Google EB-5 regional centers, and then whoever pays most for Google ads and whoever is near you will, their websites will pop up. Most of the websites, including ours, will not have project information on it because that's general solicitation and that's prohibited. If you do see specific project information online, that probably means that either they're flouting the laws or they're going through the very complicated process of doing a 506c3. But I have no good answer for that because fundamentally, while this is now being taken advantage of by many people who are in the United States on F1 visas and student visas, fundamentally, this is a program for people overseas. Now, if you're overseas, I'm from Korea. In Korea, there are such things called migration agencies. United States is probably the only country that doesn't have migration agencies because US is a destination. Not a lot of people leave the US for other countries. But if you're from any other country, you will have come across migration. There are agencies overseas, and that's their business to introduce overseas products. So immigration products or immigration, EB2, EB3, like different routes to immigration. If you're in the United States, it's a little difficult. Right now, what people are doing is basically Googling. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that really is the only option for people who are in the United States right now. And then let's go from there. Or you find an immigration attorney who might know some regional centers and can point you to the right direction. But obviously, immigration attorneys are not investment advisors. So they're going to, disclaim it up and down. It's like, I'm just giving you this information because you're asking for it. I'm not in any way vouching for this regional center or advising you on the investment side.
So when working with a regional center, you have to invest, and you would invest the $800,000 to be in the program, the EB-5 program. Would then they be put on a waiting list, or do you get added to a wait list first, or a backlog, for lack of a better term, and then invest the money when it's their time?
Mm-hmm. So the question is, when do you invest? The answer is you have to invest in order to file the I-526.
Okay.
So the investment comes first. Generally with regional center programs, because you're basically buying into a fund, it happens concurrently. You invest into a fund, you get the investment letter, and then you add that to your I-526 petition, and then you file.
Does it have to be all upfront, 800,000, or could it be in payments?
So the law says you can file an I-526 if you have invested or are in the process of investing. So the law does allow for a staggered investment. But there are no products out there that provide for these staggered investments. So if you're basically buying a unit into a fund, and that unit is $800,000, and if you can't buy the unit, you can't buy into the fund. Occasionally, there will be instances where people stagger it a little bit. For example, last week, I'm sure a lot of people did, not last week, you didn't have regional center programs, so the program had lapsed. But in the past, there had been separate deadlines where people thought it was going to go up and they wanted to put the I-526 in. So there are occasional reasons, kind of outlier reasons why it would be staggered, but generally you cannot do that. Not because the law doesn't allow it, it's just that there are no products that allow it.
Since the amount of investment has gone up, if someone, I mean, I don't know how long the backlog is for some of these countries, but let's say someone is on the backlog for China. And when they initially invested, it was 500,000, but now it went up to 800,000. Did they reserve their spot because they invested? Okay.
Yeah. The minimum investment amount only is at the date of the filing and the investment. Just because this changes does not mean you have to put in more money. And it just as an aside, this 800/1.05 million will stay constant for the next 5 years. And the new law allows for incremental increases every 5 years, depending on the consumer price index numbers. And so we'll have new numbers in 5 years. This is the first time they've introduced this concept because from 1993 until last week, except for that bump where there was a law change and the litigation, it has stayed constant and not kept up with inflation.
Sure. Does the investment for the visa, does it have to be made in cash or can it be a loan or anything to that extent?
So you have to think of it as buying a unit in a fund. So if you're buying a unit in a fund, no fund is going to give you a unit in a fund, for a deed on your house, right? It's going to be cash. However, I think the question really, we need to go one level down. I think the question might be asking, obviously it's cash, but can I use a loan to procure that cash? Might really be the question. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm a student. This question comes up a lot. I'm a student. I'm a junior in college. I want to stay in the United States. I think I'll be able to get an H-1B. Maybe I'll even get an EB-2 because my country's not backlog, but I don't know. And my parents want to secure my immigration future, and they want me to do an EB-5. They can't do an EB-5 and bring me along as their child because I'm already over 21. Because remember, I said only an investor and unmarried children under the age of 21 can do this. But if they want to gift me money to do EB-5, that is fine. Because, and I didn't go into this, but a big part of the I-526 is the investor source of fund. And so question that comes up a lot is, can I get money gifted to do EB-5? The answer is absolutely. However, when we do that, the USCIS will put me aside and look at my parents' source of funds and see where they got the money. And then the next question usually is, can I get a loan to do EB-5? And the answer is yes. This is a little iffy, but the bottom line is yes, you can get a loan. It used to be you could only do a secured loan and a loan secured with your own personal property. And then there was litigation. Right now, the current rule is you can get an unsecured loan, but it has to be a real loan. And you can also get a gift, but it also has to be a real gift. For example, let's say, Evan, you decide to gift me $800,000 so I can do this. The USCIS is not going to look at this, and we put in a gift agreement. USCIS is not going to look at this and say, oh, Evan just gifted Julia $800,000. It's not going to fly. It's obviously a loan that we're saying is a gift. So it has to be valid on its face. And so there are very different complicated rules related to that. But the bottom line is, yes, you can get a loan. Exactly what type of loan is a little bit iffy because the litigation was only recently resulted in the USCIS kind of saying, okay, we'll take unsecured loans, because in the past that was a no-no. whether they will actually do what the court ruling said, or come back in a couple of years and come up with all these different reasons why they can't do that, which they have done in the past. We're not sure. So to the extent that you can get a secured loan, we advise that. And if your parents are going to get a loan to do this, that loan needs to be secured. So secured loans are the gold standard if you're going to do a loan.
Can an undocumented person who's living in the country invest in the investor program?
They can invest, but they're not getting the green card. That's yeah. We get this question a lot because there are a lot of undocumented people who, I mean, we think of undocumented people and we think that they all don't have. That's not true. Just because of the way the draconian laws work, there are people who are kind of stuck here, who are living their lives. They make a good living and even enough to do EB-5. But the answer is no, because you can do the I-526, but after the I-526, remember, you have to do an adjustment of status in order to get a green card. If you're in the United States, you can only do an AOS, an adjustment of status, if your current status is legal. So if you're currently not legal, you can't adjust to a green card. So if you're currently not legal, what you need to do is you need to get a visa from overseas. However, the reason there are so many undocumented people who can't leave, and this is kind of outside the scope of EB-5, is that if you have been illegally here, unlawfully here for over a year, and you leave the country, you cannot come back in for 10 years. If you've been unlawfully here for over a year or more. If you've been unlawfully here between 6 months and 1 year, you can leave and come back in 3 years. So if you've been here unlawfully here for a long time, there are no avenues to get an immigrant visa because you can't adjust because you're not legal. You could get a visa overseas, but that would be like 10 plus years from now. Once you leave, you can't come back in. You just can't come back in. It's just the rule. And in that case, if you're undocumented, the only route to getting your status fixed is to marry a U.S. citizen, or if you have U.S. born children, wait until they turn 21 so they can sponsor you as a parent of a U.S. citizen. Because when you're adjusting as a spouse or a parent, the fact that you're unlawful is forgiven. But there are other rules as well, which is outside the scope, but that's the general
rule. I know we're getting close on time. We have a couple other questions. And how do you feel the new reform is going to affect the EB-5 investment application submitted, the amount? How do you think it's going to be impacted?
Well, as I mentioned before, during the past 2 years or so, EB-5 has practically been dead. Because it was very hard for people to stomach that it was $900,000. Oh, wait, and it's 900 and the wait is forever. Wait, I mean, even in a non-backlog country, it's like 3 or 4 years. If you're from China, I'm like, oh, well, you can do it, but you'll get a green card in 15 years. 20 maybe, which compared to the 50 to 150 years for Indian EB-5, at least it's in your lifetime. So EB-5 was very depressed ever since it went up to 900,000, and then it went back down to 500,000. So that was supposed to revitalize the market, but separate from the amount going back down, which was a result of litigation, the regional center program lapsed. It lapsed within 2 weeks. The litigation result brought everything back down to 500,000 in mid-June 2021. And on June 30, 2021, the regional center program lapsed. They're not related events. So there was only a 2-week period people could do regional center EB-5. So the result of it going back down really didn't help a lot of people. There was a mini boom of direct EB-5s during since last year, since the program lapsed, since July of last year until today. There was a boom of people doing $500,000 direct EB-5s, because remember, direct EB-5s counts real jobs, or therefore does not need a regional center. And so there was a mini boom of direct EB-5 people, direct EB-5 projects soliciting investment. And so a handful of people were able to do 500,000 the past 9 months, but most people who rely on investing in a regional center fund had to sit it out. How will this change? I think this will bring a mini boom, at least for the next year, because like I said before, even at 800,000, there are people who are willing to do this, especially for their children. The two big markets are kids going to school here, kids who are sent to boarding school here, who went to college here, who don't want to go back home. Not because Korea or India or China is a terrible country to live in. They're wonderful. I'm from Korea, but this is what they know. They went to school here. Their friends are here. English is their preferred language now, and they don't want to go back home. And they're going to say, Dad, can you get me an EB-5? And there will be people who do this for their children. So children working, living, and even though it's 800, the fact that they can get a work permit 6 months, which is a drop in a bucket compared to the 4 or 5 years they had to wait before, I think it's attractive for foreign students. But that bump will only last for about a year, because pretty soon Korea, India, Brazil, they're all going to backlog. It's not a matter of maybe they will 100% backlog. That's a mathematical equation. If we take the number of I-526s already in the pipeline, assuming 80% of those get approved, it's going to backlog. It's a numerical, it's a math question. The answer is there. But at least for a year or so, before the visa numbers catch up, concurrent filing will be possible. So if you do EB-5 now and file concurrently and get an EAD, a work permit and a travel document, and then your country visa backlog, so you don't get a conditional green card for another many, many years, you can keep extending your work and travel permit. So definitely, I see at least, and it's not just me, a lot of people in the next year expect the EB-5 market to come back. It will never come back to the extent of 2016, 2017, where people were able to fund skyscrapers and the Hudson Yards, $300 million, $600 million from China. It's never going to go back to that, because there's just not that much interest, but there will definitely be a market for smaller projects. And even our regional center, our last project was the project next to Columbia University that I talked about. And since then, we have not been doing any projects because it was 500, it was 900, it's back to 500, the regional program left. It's too many uncertainties. I can't underwrite a good project with that kind of uncertainty. And so we were pretty much done with doing new projects, and now we're working on the next one. So at least for the next year or so, there will be a bump in the marketplace.
Is the B1 and B2 visas also backlogged?
B1 and B2 are non-immigrant visas, meaning they don't lead to green cards. They're tourist visas. And B1 and B2 do not have a quota. They do not have a quota. Only certain non-immigrant visas have, I think only one actually. H-1B is the only non-immigrant visa that has a quota of 65,000 a year. That's why you hear about these lotteries and people doing that. But B1, B2, F1, these visas don't have a quota.
And it looks like we have one final question. So back to the creation of jobs. What happens if someone invests directly in an EB-5, creates the correct number of jobs, but then it dips below the quota, or if a situation kind of like with COVID where that business ends up dissolving?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Visa revoked? Is there a grace period?
Right. So that's a good question. In the regional center context where you are creating indirect job numbers, these are not jobs that are there and then people lose. These are numbers. So going back to the hotel example, if I put $20 million into a hotel project and that resulted in the economic model spits out 240 jobs, as long as I have spent the $20 million in a qualified manner, those 240 jobs are created and done. So the hotel can close, the hotel can get sold, the hotel can go bankrupt. It doesn't matter. Your jobs are there. So that doesn't matter. The real question comes in a direct EB-5 context. So you opened a pain clinic. and you have the workers. And now it's time to file the 829, and COVID hit and you had to close down because the government shut you down. So, what happens there? There are certain rules that allow for a little bit of flexibility, as long as you can show, and this requires very good record keeping and guidance by an immigration lawyer who knows what they're doing. But as long as you have good records showing that at one point you created those jobs that were meant to be permanent, but then you lost it, or this process took so long that you sold the restaurant, there are ways that you can show it. But it gets more, that's another reason why regional center programs were very attractive. The job creation was a little bit more solid. And I do have a YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and look for EB-5, you have a YouTube channel that really breaks down a lot of the concepts that I've talked about in more detail. I compare direct EB-5s and regional center EB-5s, talk about the job creation models. But now I have to come up with a whole new set of videos because the rules have changed. If you're interested, you can kind of go back and you'll see that for 2 years, I didn't post anything almost. I did one video just giving an update because there was really no activity.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This was
Sure.
informative. I've been in the global industry and the global marketplace for about 5 years, and everyone talks about the EB-5 and could always learn something new. It was very informative today. So thank you so much.
Very interesting. Thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone.
Our pleasure. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Join us next week as we feature Francis Fernandez, our good friend and CEO to our Ambassador Association, the Spanish International Realty Alliance, also known as CIRA. We will be taking a deep dive into the real estate market in Spain, discussing trends and forecasts of their housing markets, licensing laws and regulations, and the economy and culture. For a full list of everything else going on this month, head over to our webpage, www.lirealtor.com/global success month. See you next week, everyone. Thank you.